Hello and welcome to this week's Birkbeck Connections recording. As you know, Birkbeck Connections in Organisational Psychology is a project that aims to bring together our professional community to connect, to share the latest evidence and research and trends in practice, and to learn from each other. What we do is we try and invite academics, current students, alumni, past students, and anyone with an interest in organisational psychology to come and join us. When possible, what we're going to be doing is curating a quarterly networking series. In the meantime, though, we have curated this short interview series to share some particularly pertinent research that we and members of the department have conducted within the Department of Organisational Psychology here at Birkbeck. The theme of today's session is to talk about a report that Joe Yarker and I recently collaborated on, along with BITC, which was called "What If Your Job Was Good with You?" What if your job was good for you? I'm sorry about that. And I'm delighted to welcome Louise Aston from Business in the Community, who commissioned this research. Welcome, Louise. Louise, before we talk about what was in this report and what this research was about, I wonder if you might share with our audience a little bit more about what you do at BITC. So a little bit about your role and also about how BITC supports businesses in ways to make them more productive and healthy and inclusive.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Yes, I'd be delighted. So I'm Louise Aston. I'm Wellbeing Director at Business in the Community, which is the Prince's Responsible Business Network. And really at the heart of what we do is basically around sustainability. And our Bible, if you like, is our Responsible Business Map, which is aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the campaign that I lead is basically, if you think of the Sustainable Development Goals, we look at health and well-being through a multiple intersectional lenses of employment and skills, in terms of diversity and inclusion, and increasingly we're beginning to look at connecting with nature as a key strand of well-being, so the environment as well. So each of those areas on that responsible business map, there is a kind of business-led board of executive directors. So the board that supports well-being is chaired by Lloyds Banking Group, and we have multiple kind of sectors of about 15 different companies. We also have a big network of well-being practitioners, and we support those practitioners through kind of advisory support, but we also produce practical resources like this one, which is, although it's evidence-based, it's also very much action-driven. So we have a lot of resources that are practical and also advisory products as well. So in terms of that leadership team, I work really closely with them to provide that kind of thought leadership, but we're obviously working within a larger context of business in the community, and our priority right now is around our kind of responsible business manifesto, which is about building back responsibly. And we have an integrated campaign, which the wellbeing part I lead, this is all about sustainability and responsible business. Everything we look at with wellbeing is very much through that inclusive lens. And because I've got colleagues who are working solely on race, age, and gender, as well as the environment, we're really able to kind of cross-fertilize what we do.
Fantastic, thank you. And I was wondering if we could share with the audience a little bit more about why this report now, and specifically how it links into the Mental Health at Work Charter.
back in 2019, is we worked with the Thriving at Work Leadership Council to look at developing a commitment that actually kind of came over all the other plethora of commitments, pledges, that was evidence-based and based on the Thriving at Work report. So basically, we updated the 6 standards that came out of the Thriving at Work report back in, gosh, I think it was 2017, and we launched the Mental Health at Work commitment. As I said, in 2019, it's got over 1,000 signatories to date. It's aimed at all organisations, regardless of size, sector. And really what it is, it's an evidence-based kind of real declaration of your organisation's commitment to going on that journey wherever you were. It's underpinned by 6 standards, and the second standard before the pandemic was felt by many to be very, very challenging. So that standard is about proactively ensuring that work design and organisational culture drive positive health outcomes. And up until the pandemic, it's what we were generally seeing is, although awareness of mental health had risen, it wasn't translating into kind of tackling the systemic root causes of poor mental health. And we know that it's actually work. 41% of employees experience poor mental health due to work, or where work was a contributory factor in the past year. So although the commitment is the spine of our campaign, we have a special focus on that standard too. And when the pandemic came along, so much changed in terms of ways of working, literally overnight. Things that people had deemed to be impossible, like working remotely at scale. And we actually felt, our leadership team felt, that this was a once in a lifetime opportunity to really put together an evidence-based, very kind of action-orientated report, which is why this report came along. But I think it's significant, although our research partner was Affinity Health at Work, we collaborated with many stakeholders. So for example, CIPD peer-reviewed the report and endorsed it. In terms of also working collaboratively with Thriving at Work Leadership Council, but also with national organisations like Mind, Mental Health UK, and Society of Occupational Medicine. So the end product is very collaborative, it's evidence-based. We don't have all the answers as we transition into this new era of new ways of working, but what we really want to happen is actually to convene organisations to test and learn together, so we can learn from each other. Where we've got all sorts of activities planned. The next one is actually on the 22nd of September. And if you'd like to come to that webinar, it's on Business in the Community's website. Have I answered your question?
That's wonderful, thank you. And we can share the link to the webinar on this series as well.
Jo, I wonder whether you'd be able to tell the audience a bit more about the methodology taken. I know Louise has talked very much about this collaborative approach that we took in the together in this research, but could you describe a bit more about how we came to the reports and the framework we're going to talk about?
So in terms of the approach, so we were really fortunate to be involved in the sense that a lot of our work really tries to drive that action forward. And as Louise was mentioning, there's a lot that we see that people are raising awareness and not necessarily knowing how to take action. And so what we did to help develop that pathway to really think about how we change that culture and embed that psychological health and well-being culture was to do a number of things. So first of all, we drew from the evidence that's already there. So rather than reinventing the wheel, we know there's so much good evidence that often is not accessed really to drive decisions in the workplace. So we conducted an evidence review to look at what's working, what do we know about good work and the way work is designed and managed, and how can we weave that in to help prioritize some of the things that ended up going into the model. But we were also very much led by key practitioners in the area and those really leading in the field. So Louise mentioned the BITC Wellbeing leadership team, and we were so fortunate to conduct interviews with many of those leaders that are driving forward global wellbeing policies and practices, have real insight into what's working in their organizations and creative ideas about what we can do to move the discussion forward. So we conducted interviews with many of the leadership team and looked at what those key themes were throughout those interviews. And then finally, we went back to some of the more recent evidence. So the BITC and Bupa Collaborative Mental Health at Work report shares a number of really fascinating statistics that give us a view of what's really going on for people in organizations. And so we drew on those to help exemplify some of the key points and drive the discussion forward there. So all of those things were taken together. And then that's where that collaborative process started, really. So Rachel and I, we went through a stage where we were looking at the model, pulling things together to prioritize how we might put that proposition forward. And then it went through a number of iterations, didn't it, to ensure that we really had this collaborative lens on what was being put forward. And I think that that helped us reach a good solution at the end. So I wonder if it's a good idea for me to share now, share the screen in terms of where our medal came from. So if I just share this now, hopefully you will see the report up there. And so that's what the report looks like. We'll provide the link to the report as well. But I wonder if I hand over to you, Rachel, to talk us through what the model actually looks like in the end, what came out of it.
Yes, I think one of the gifts of this research really is that, as Louise described at the beginning, BITC have spearheaded this idea of good work and better work for a long time within practice, being one of the leaders in their field. And one of their central models is called the work well model. And the work well model, as you can see here, the pink quadrant is called better work. And when we looked at this better work model, which was made up of good work, so work where employees feel valued and appreciated, made up of good job design, so that's where people have reasonable demands, have autonomy to be able to design their jobs, are supported and enjoy good relationships, know what they're there for, and have psychological safety, so meaning that they're able to speak up and be able to voice their concerns or their issues without fear of reprisal or recrimination. When we essentially looked at this better work, we saw really how much this was talking about the culture that standard 2 of the mental health at work commitment was really pulling out. And what better work was doing was actually describing where we want to go, so what we want to achieve. And we felt our role in this report was to show organizations what they need to focus on to make this happen. And from that, we were able to, through the data analysis of all the different types of data that Joe talked about, develop these 5 themes of essentially what we call enabling factors. So those factors that if organizations focus on these, will enable them to have this better work. And those themes are having open dialogue and feedback, so where employees are able to talk openly about mental health, where there's a consistent collaboration and conversation going on within organizations. It's about also having a collaborative individual approach. So this is where rather than this idea of one size fits all in terms of job design or in terms of well-being, it's about recognizing everyone wants different things. And this report is bigger and is longer than the pandemic, but the pandemic has really shown us, hasn't it, about all the different aspects of our lives that go into creating what we want from work. And so this is about this idea of individual collaborative, this idea that organizations need to design jobs with individuals in mind. The third enabling factor is about focusing on relationships, particularly the manager relationship. We know, and Joe and I have long worked in the field and actually came into this area of researching and working in mental health at work with investigating the manager relationship, seeing how absolutely vital the manager is to the relationship between the employee and their experience of mental ill health. And so this enabling factor is all about making sure managers are equipped with the skills and the resources to be able to spot signs and symptoms, perhaps be able to manage what employees need. And wider than the manager, just recognizing how key those social relationships are at work. There's some lovely research that talks about these social connections being the glue that holds organizations together, rather than this idea of kind of conversations being nice to haves or something that are aside. The fourth is about this appropriate physical environment. And as Louise mentioned at the beginning, how vital this idea of nature is to BITC strategy going forward. And what we found here is again, how important nature, how important having access to the outside, how important having a plant space from which to be able to thrive was important. And again, the impetus for organizations saying, regardless of where people work, there needs to be a standard set of conditions that you enable, and we need to enable those conditions for people to thrive, rather than people to just be able to get on with their work. And the final enabling factor, measuring and monitoring, and quoting Louise again, which is her quote, which is, what gets measured gets managed. This idea that sometimes what we see is lots of organizations are doing lots of great things around improving mental health and providing better work, but then they're not actually monitoring what they're doing, and so not able to tap into perhaps those pockets within the organization that are not benefiting, and also tapping into how we can see that we're continually improving and moving forward. And so these 5 enabling factors we then saw from all the other work we've done have to sit within a context. So have to sit within a context of organizational values. And these values that we found to be absolutely key were values of inclusivity and equity, values of trust and appreciation, of authenticity, and of empathy and compassion, and sitting amongst everything. And that very much feeds into this, to BITC's responsible roadmap and business, is this idea of sustainability, and how we are focused on more than ever about the need to be sustainable and create organizations that are good both for our people and for wider society as well. So you can see there how the model is really an embedded model that enables organizations to hopefully very much see. And our report has lots and lots of best practice examples. We also have case studies from organizations. And what we also have are calls to action. Louise, I wonder whether you could tell us about what those calls to action are. Well, you're on mute, Louise.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, our 2 calls to action we feel are actually quite edgy. There's a lot of talk around psychological safety, but really no one quite knows what it means. But when you think back to the 41% of employees who experience a poor mental health issue due to work, or where work was a contributory factor, that simply wouldn't be tolerated if that had caused a physical injury. And why should it be acceptable that people are getting their mental health is being negatively impacted? So we really want to achieve parity between the management of physical health and safety with mental health and safety, with an open and accountable culture. So that's thinking about this. There should be no dichotomy between operational and psychological health and safety. You know, if you spot a risk or hazard, you should be able to speak up and be actively listened to. And also, if you have your own mental health issue, you shouldn't fear negative consequences, which we know, sadly, people don't disclose because they fear career death. And then the second one, which we love, is enable employees to co-create their own good jobs, supported by managers and aligned with organisational practices and policies. And, you know, already, you know, in terms of kind of flexible working from home, you know, literally being transformational overnight, is employers have seen that people can be trusted and that productivity levels aren't going to fall through the floor. And, you know, the reason that we've put co-create is obviously you can't do it in a vacuum, which is why particularly the support of line managers and aligned to organisational practices and policies is so key. But in terms of the possibilities here are extraordinary. So, and just really the final thing, the report in terms of how it's been received by our members and stakeholders, and indeed basically kind of broader circles, has been very, very, very positive. And we do hope that with all the kind of follow-up and listening that we're going to be doing, and hopefully another round of mental health at work YouGov survey, is that we will hopefully have part 2 of this in a year's time.
Fantastic. Thank you. That'd be really exciting to see where people are travelling to. I think that that important point that you raised at the beginning is that we don't have all the answers, and it's really trying to encourage that test and learn process. Now is the time where we should be empowered to test and learn as much as we can, because nothing is set in stone. So it'll be really exciting to see how people's journeys have evolved and what learnings have come out of it.
It's immensely exciting, and you know, there are really positive opportunities, but let's not forget some of the really kind of at the severe end of the spectrum. You know, we've seen there's a lot of people who've lost loved ones before their time, and basically they haven't been able to grieve in a conventional way because of social distancing. We've also seen domestic abuse rates soar, and with hybrid working continuing, or even, you know, remote working continuing for quite some time, those issues aren't going to go away, and we're still not clear, and we won't be until the kind of lagging indicators come through on rates of suicide. So I think we have to be mindful of looking at the whole spectrum, as well as, you know, the kind of really positive things like co-creating your own good job.
Absolutely, really important points to bring in. It's going to be a challenging venture for many, many people and many organisations. And I think one of the things that's really inspiring with the report and the framework is how I think no matter where you are in your journey, you can make a commitment to move towards better jobs and better working environments for your people. And so in terms of those take homes, then there's the calls for action, but there's also, you mentioned a webinar on the 22nd of September, but also we'll include the link to the report, and there's an opportunity there to also sign up. So if your organisation isn't signed up to the mental health at work commitment, then we'd certainly encourage you to take a deeper look at that and take that forward, so that hopefully together we can all start to build healthier working environments for everybody. So thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you for joining us, Louise. It's lovely to see you.
And thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, a real pleasure working with Affinity. It really has.